The distant star station, Viridian Deep, hovered in silent vigil at the edge of the murky nebula. Streams of cosmic dust and volatile gases swirled like phantom dancers around its fragile metallic frame, occasionally illuminated by energy pulses from the research outpost sensors. The station's inhabitants, a diverse mixture of scientists, technicians, and their families representing a dozen species from across the galactic concord, had long grown accustomed to the eerie beauty of their home. Dr. Alara Vance stood at the observation deck, her slender fingers tracing equations on the transparent data pad as she analyzed the latest energy readings from the nebula's core. As the station's lead xenophysicist and energy specialist, she had dedicated the past 5 years to unraveling the mysteries of the unusual energy patterns emanating from deep within the cosmic cloud. The work was slow but rewarding, offering glimpses into fundamental forces that could revolutionize interstellar travel and energy production. Still chasing ghosts, Vance? The gravelly voice of Zalter, the station's chief technician, broke her concentration. The Xyler's 4 arms were simultaneously adjusting different components of a portable scanner, his exoskeletal frame making soft clicking sounds as he moved toward her. Alara smiled without looking up. These patterns aren't random, Zalter. There's an intelligence to them, a rhythm I can almost grasp. Intelligence in energy waves? Zalter's compound eyes glinted with skepticism. Next you'll be telling me the void speaks to you. Not the void, she replied, finally meeting his gaze, but something within it, something old. The Xyler's mandibles twitched in what passed for a shrug among his species. Old or new, my concern is keeping this station operational while you academics chase your theories. Speaking of which, the eastern hull sensors are showing irregular readings again. Alara was about to respond when the station's lighting flickered, then dimmed to emergency levels. A moment later, the artificial gravity wavered, causing loose objects to momentarily float before crashing back down as the system stabilized. That wasn't a power fluctuation, Zalter said, his voice dropping to a whisper as all 4 hands reached for his tool belt. That was... The station's alert system erupted into a cacophony of blaring alarms. The observation deck's transparent walls automatically polarized, revealing the space beyond and the horror that approached. The nebula's swirling gases were being disturbed by something massive moving through them. Not a ship, but what appeared to be a storm of crystalline shards, each reflecting the nebula's light in prismatic patterns that would have been beautiful if not for their ominous advance. The formation moved with purpose, coalescing and separating in patterns that defied natural phenomena. Silicate Scourge. Alara breathed, her blood turning to ice. The name came to her from old family records, from stories told in hushed tones by her grandmother. Tales of an ancient enemy encountered during humanity's first expansions beyond their home system, before the founding of the Concord. The station's communication system crackled to life. All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown hostile entities approaching from Vector 79er. This is not a drill. Defensive systems activating. But Alara knew the station's modest defenses would be useless. The Silicate Scourge wasn't just approaching. It was accelerating, its crystalline mass spreading out to engulf the station's outer research modules. We need to move now. Zalter grabbed her arm with one of his lower limbs, already turning toward the emergency lift. Central core is our best chance. Thickest shielding, independent power supply. As they raced through corridors already filling with panicked personnel, the station shuddered violently. Through viewport windows, Alara caught glimpses of the horror unfolding. Crystalline formations piercing through the station's outer hulls like they were made of paper, material being absorbed and reconfigured into more crystal as they watched. They're not just destroying, she gasped as they pushed through the crowd. They're converting matter, assimilating it. Zalter didn't respond, focusing instead on shepherding them toward the central core where other survivors were gathering. As the chief technician, he immediately took charge, barking orders to seal bulkheads and reroute power to the core's independent shields. Communications, someone shouted. A young human technician shook his head frantically. All standard channels are dead. There's some kind of energy disruption field surrounding us. Quantum, subspace, even old radio waves. Nothing's getting through. Alara felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The scourge wasn't just attacking blindly. It was isolating them, cutting them off methodically before consuming them. This wasn't random aggression. It was strategy. She pushed through the crowd towards Zalter, who was hunched over the central command console. "The emergency beacon," she said. "The old one." The Xyler's compound eyes narrowed. "The Legion relic? That thing hasn't been tested in decades, Vance. We don't even know if it works, let alone who would receive the signal. It operates on principles the Scourge can't block," she insisted. "Quantum echo technology from before the Terran Civil War. It was designed specifically to penetrate any known jamming field. And broadcast our location to what? The war's been over for centuries. No one's listening on those frequencies anymore." Alara leaned closer. "My great-grandfather served in those conflicts, Zalter. The stories passed down to my family. The energy signatures I'm seeing from the Scourge match descriptions from old war journals. This enemy is ancient, predating the Concord. The Legion beacon might be our only hope." The station rocked again, more violently this time. Status displays flashed urgent warnings. The outer rings had been completely breached, and the middle sectors were failing. They had minutes, perhaps less. Zalter's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep anxiety in his species. "Where is this relic?" Moments later, they were forcing open a sealed panel in the core's maintenance section, revealing a small, unremarkable device that looked more like an antique than a piece of potentially life-saving technology. Alara's hands moved with surprising confidence over its surface, entering a complex activation sequence from memory. "This will do more than just broadcast our location," she explained as she worked. "It's designed to transmit tactical data, everything we know about the attackers, their patterns, weaknesses. I'm adding all my research on the energy signatures." The device hummed to life, its surface illuminating with symbols from a forgotten military language. Alara stepped back, her expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. "What have we done?" Zalter whispered. "Send out a prayer," she replied, watching as the device's lights pulsed rhythmically, sending quantum echoes into the void. "To gods we don't know." Deep in the station's remaining systems, ancient algorithms processed the quantum signatures of the attacking force, categorized them according to long-forgotten threat classifications, and attached a single designation before broadcasting the distress call into the depths of space. Omega Threat. The beacon sent its message hurtling through dimensions beyond normal space. A desperate SOS, carrying with it the seeds of their possible salvation, or perhaps their final doom. The frozen world of Hades Prime hung like a tarnished silver orb against the backdrop of space, its surface scarred by massive fortifications visible even from orbit. Once a military stronghold during the darkest days of the Terran Civil War, it had become a self-imposed prison for the defeated remnants of the Legion Ascendant, the most feared and uncompromising faction of that ancient conflict. Deep beneath the planet's glacial surface, in chambers hewn from bedrock and reinforced with materials science had long since forgotten how to create, the descendants of the Legion maintained their vigil. Their society had evolved into something between a monastic order and a permanent military encampment, preserving the harsh disciplines and unyielding philosophies that had once made their ancestors the most effective fighting force humanity had ever produced. In the deepest chamber of all, surrounded by ancient technology that hummed with barely contained power, slept the last true warlord of the Legion Ascendant. Suspended in a preservation field, his body, more machine than flesh after centuries of combat and augmentation, remained in a state of semi-hibernation, awaiting a call that most believed would never come. He was known simply as Warlord Salus, the Void Hammer, the last supreme commander of the Legion. History had recorded his defeat, but not his end, for he had chosen exile with his most loyal followers rather than surrender to what he considered the weakness and compromise of the emerging galactic concord. The monitoring systems surrounding his preservation chamber had maintained their silent watch for centuries, programmed to ignore all but the most specific triggers. When the quantum echo from Viridian Deep arrived, penetrating the planetary defenses as if they weren't there, these ancient systems recognized what modern technology could not: the signature of an Omega-level threat. Preservation fields dissipated. Support systems initiated revival protocols. Power surged through cybernetic implants that threaded throughout the warlord's massive frame. In the control center above, alarms blared as technicians scrambled to understand what was happening. The chamber that had been dormant for generations was suddenly alive with activity. "It's impossible," one of the younger officers insisted, staring at readings he couldn't interpret. "Nothing could activate those systems without council authorization." High Commander Vex, eldest of the military council that governed Hades Prime, pushed through the gathering crowd, his ancient frame still imposing despite his age. "Not impossible," he rasped, his augmented eyes widening at the familiar patterns on the screens. "Inevitable." Before anyone could question him, the massive doors to the inner sanctum slid open for the first time in living memory. Steam billowed out, obscuring the figure that emerged, but not for long. Warlord Salus stood over 7 feet tall, his broad frame encased in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His face, what remained of it, was a study in angles and scars, with eyes that glowed with an internal light that was neither fully mechanical nor organic. When he spoke, his voice resonated with harmonics that bypassed the ears and seemed to vibrate directly in the bones of those who heard it. "An Omega signal has been received," he stated, not a question, but a confirmation. "The ancient enemy has returned." The council chamber erupted in chaos as Salus strode toward the central command platform. His movements were fluid despite centuries of dormancy, each step precise and economical, the gait of a predator who had never forgotten how to hunt. "Impossible," one of the younger council members protested. "The signal must be a malfunction or a trick from the Concord to locate us." Salus didn't look at the speaker. He simply extended his hand, and the ancient systems of the chamber responded, projecting a holographic representation of the distress call's contents. The crystalline formations of the silicate scourge rotated in the air before them, along with data streams showing energy signatures and behavioral patterns. "This is no deception," Salus stated. "This is the enemy we were created to fight. The enemy that predates your concord, your peace, your comfort. This is why the Legion exists." High Commander Vex stepped forward, his posture a mixture of military discipline and uncertainty. "Warlord, the covenant of isolation has preserved us for centuries. If we break it now, the covenant exists to preserve our strength until it is needed," Salus interrupted. "That time has come. The signal carries Omega classification, the highest threat designation from our time. These creatures do not negotiate, do not surrender, do not cease. They consume everything in their path and use it to replicate. Your ancestors called them the Silicate Scourge. Mine called them the end of all things." He turned to face the assembled council, his augmented eyes scanning each face. "I require a status report on the Ragnarok." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Finally, Vex spoke. "The flagship has been maintained as directed, Warlord. It remains our greatest military asset, though it has not seen active deployment since our arrival on Hades Prime." "And the Praetorian Guard?" "2 full battalions remain in cryostasis, as you commanded. They await only your word." Salus nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Prepare for immediate deployment. The source of the Omega signal is a research outpost designated Viridian Deep, located in the Cygnus Reach Nebula. Calculate fold space coordinates and prepare the fleet." "The fleet?" Vex's voice betrayed his shock. "Warlord, we maintain only a defensive perimeter now. The Ragnarok is our sole capital ship. The rest were decommissioned or converted centuries ago." For the first time, something resembling emotion crossed Salus's face, a momentary tightening of artificial muscles, a narrowing of luminous eyes. "Then the Ragnarok will go alone," he declared. One ship is sufficient against conventional enemies. Against the Scourge, it will have to be enough. Hours later, as the Ragnarok prepared for departure, dissent continued among the council. Many argued that the isolation policy had served them well, that engaging with the outside galaxy again would only bring destruction upon them. Others feared that Salus, a relic from a more brutal time, would reignite conflicts best left in history. Produced in modern shipyards, angular, threatening, with weapon emplacements that seemed excessive even by military standards. As the great engines ignited, preparing to tear a hole through the fabric of space itself, Salus stood on the command deck, surrounded by the awakened Praetorians, genetically enhanced super soldiers whose loyalty to him transcended time itself. Set course for Viridian Deep, he commanded. Maximum combaridin. We hunt the ancient enemy once more. The space around the Ragnarok distorted as its fold space generators created an artificial wormhole. With a flash of energy that temporarily outshone Hades Prime's distant sun, the warship vanished, carrying with it humanity's most terrible weapon and its last, best hope against the encroaching darkness. In the 3 days since the initial attack, Viridian Deep had been transformed into a crystalline nightmare. What had once been a thriving research station was now a grotesque sculpture of jagged formations and hollowed-out structures. The silicate scourge moved through this transformed environment with casual deadliness, extending crystalline appendages that absorbed any material they touched, converting it into more of their own substance. The survivors, now numbering less than 50 from an original population of over 300, had retreated to the station's central core. Here, the reinforced walls and independent power supply had allowed them to maintain a failing energy shield that kept the Scourge temporarily at bay. Dr. Alara Vance worked feverishly at a jury-rigged console, her once immaculate uniform now stained and torn, dark circles under her eyes testifying to days without proper rest. Around her, the remaining civilians huddled in fearful groups while the few security personnel maintained a vigilant watch on the shield perimeters. Power levels dropping again, Zalter reported, his normally vibrant exoskeleton now dull with exhaustion. We're down to 23% capacity. Even with all non-essential systems shut down, we've got hours at most. Alara nodded without looking up from her calculations. I've been able to modify the shield frequencies to resist their assimilation attempts more effectively, but it's not a permanent solution. They're adapting too quickly. Through the reinforced viewport, they could see the Scourge testing the shields, sending crystalline probes that shattered against the energy barrier only to reform and try again with slight variations. Each attempt came closer to penetrating their last defense. "What are they?" asked a young Tellurian researcher, her luminescent skin pulsing with fear patterns. "Why are they doing this?" "They're silicon-based life forms, but unlike any we've encountered before," Alara explained, her academic background providing a momentary distraction from their dire situation. "They don't think as individuals. They're a collective consciousness that perceives all matter as either a threat or a resource. And right now, we're both." "That doesn't explain why they attacked us in the first place," Zalter interjected. "We were no threat to them." Alara's hands paused over her console. I think they're after something specific. The energy patterns I've been studying from the nebula's core, they share certain frequencies with the Scourge's own energy signatures. They might be drawn to it like a beacon." A sudden commotion near the communication station interrupted their conversation. The young technician monitoring the system was frantically adjusting controls. "I've got something," he called out. "A ship approaching the nebula perimeter." Hope surged through the chamber as survivors rushed toward the communications area. "Concord reinforcements?" someone asked. The technician shook his head. "I don't think so. It's not broadcasting any recognition codes, and the configuration. I've never seen anything like it." "On screen," Zalter ordered. The main display flickered to life, showing a small Concord patrol vessel cautiously navigating the nebula's outer reaches. It was conducting standard sensor sweeps, obviously responding to the station's lack of regular communications. "They don't know what they're flying into," Alara whispered in horror. As if in response to her words, a section of the nebula that had appeared empty suddenly shifted. What had seemed like normal gas and dust coalesced into crystalline forms that moved with predatory grace toward the unsuspecting patrol ship. "We need to warn them." Zalter's 4 hands moved across the console, attempting to break through the communication jamming. But it was already too late. The patrol vessel detected the approaching threat and attempted evasive maneuvers, but the Scourge moved with impossible speed. Crystalline spears larger than the ship itself formed and lanced through its hull. The vessel's engines flared brilliantly as the pilot attempted a desperate escape, but more crystal formations encircled it, contracting like a closing fist. The ship's power core detonated in a brief, brilliant flash, and then there was nothing but expanding crystal formations, growing larger as they absorbed the energy and matter from the destruction. Silence fell over the survivors' chamber. "They were just the advanced scout," Ilera finally said, her voice hollow. "When a main Concord response force arrives, they'll suffer the same fate. The Scourge will just keep growing stronger with each ship they destroy." As the reality of their situation sank in, the shield generators gave another warning tone. Power levels had dropped to critical. "I was hoping," Ilera began, then faltered. "I was hoping the emergency beacon would bring help in time." Zalter placed one of his hands on her shoulder. "It was worth trying, Vance. But no one's coming. We face this end together with dignity." As if to mock his words, the entire station suddenly shuddered violently. Not from another Scourge attack, but from something that seemed to ripple through space itself. Warning systems that had been silent before suddenly blared to life, detecting massive energy distortions. "What now?" Zalter moved back to the sensor station, his compound eyes widening at the readings. "This can't be right. It's showing a space-time rupture forming less than 10,000 kilometers from the station." Outside their viewport, the fabric of space itself seemed to tear open, creating a swirling vortex of energy unlike anything Ilera had ever seen. It wasn't the smooth transition of standard faster-than-light travel or even the calculated precision of a jump gate. This was raw, almost brutal manipulation of fundamental forces. And from this violent tear, in reality, emerged a ship, if such a word could properly describe the massive construct that pushed its way into normal space. Its hull was black as the void itself, angular and threatening, bristling with weapon systems that looked like they had been designed by someone with a profound understanding of inflicting maximum damage. The vessel dwarfed anything in the modern Concord fleet, its size alone speaking to a philosophy of warfare that favored overwhelming force over efficiency or subtlety. That's impossible," whispered one of the security officers. "Nothing that size could be built without the entire Concord knowing about it." But Ilera recognized the vessel from old family records. Images her grandmother had shown her as a child, artifact from a darker time in human history. "The Ragnarok," she breathed, "a Legion Ascendant dreadnought." The appearance of the legendary warship did not go unnoticed by the Silicate Scourge. Crystal formations throughout the station and the surrounding nebula began to shift, orienting toward this new arrival. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, they began to move toward the massive vessel. There was no hesitation from the Ragnarok. As soon as it fully materialized in normal space, its weapon systems activated with choreographed precision. Massive energy cannons that ran the length of its hull discharged, sending lances of concentrated destruction into the approaching crystal swarms. Where the energy struck, the Scourge formations simply ceased to exist, not shattered or dispersed, but utterly unmade at a fundamental level. Kinetic weapons followed, launching projectiles at velocities that defied conventional physics. These tore through the larger crystal formations, shattering them into fragments too small to maintain cohesion. Point defense turrets activated next, creating a web of sustained energy fire that prevented the fragments from reforming. The battle strategy was unlike anything taught in modern military academies. Not the careful, measured response of Concord doctrine, but an overwhelming application of force designed to eradicate rather than contain. They're not just fighting the Scourge. Zoltar observed with professional admiration. They understand it. Look at how they're targeting the nucleation points and preventing reformation. This isn't their first encounter with these creatures. As they watched, the massive warship began to advance directly toward Viridian Deep, carving a path through the crystalline entities that swarmed to oppose it. Its forward shields absorbed what would have been devastating attacks to any modern vessel, while its relentless barrage continued to decimate the Scourge formations. Then, from launch bays along the warship's flanks, smaller craft emerged, armored transports protected by fighter escorts. These moved with remarkable coordination, creating a protected corridor toward the station's core section. "They're coming for us." The hope in the young Tellurian's voice was almost painful to hear. Alara wasn't certain. The Legion Ascendant had been humanity's most effective fighting force. Yes, but also its most ruthless. They had viewed weakness as a liability, compromise as defeat. Would they see survivors as worth saving or merely as a tactical consideration? The shield protecting their section flickered one final time, then collapsed completely. The survivors braced for the end, but instead of the Scourge pouring in, the outer bulkhead exploded inward in a controlled detonation. Through the smoke strode figures encased in combat armor unlike anything Alara had seen before. Massive, articulated suits that seemed to blend mechanical and biological elements into a seamless whole. Each bore weapons that hummed with deadly energy and moved with a precision that spoke of both extensive augmentation and relentless training. The Praetorian Guard of the Legion Ascendant had arrived. Without speaking, they formed a perimeter around the survivors. One of them, bearing command insignia, approached Alara directly. "Dr. Alara Vance?" The voice that emerged from the helmet was synthesized but unmistakably human. She nodded, surprised at being recognized. "Secure for immediate extraction. Warlord Salus has prioritized your retrieval." Before she could question this, more Praetorians entered, engaging small crystalline formations that had begun seeping through other entry points. Their weapons discharged with precise efficiency, completely destroying the Scourge elements without damaging the surrounding infrastructure. Zoltar, chief technician, the Xyler, introduced himself, stepping forward. "What about the other survivors?" "All viable personnel will be evacuated," the Praetorian replied without emotion. "Priority to those with scientific or technical knowledge of the entity designated Omega threat." The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Survivors were rapidly moved through the secured corridor to the waiting transports, protected at all times by the Praetorian Guard. As they moved, Alara witnessed the full extent of the battle raging around them. The Ragnarok had positioned itself directly above the station, its massive weapons systematically destroying any Scourge formation that attempted to approach. In areas already lost to crystallization, Legion forces engaged in direct combat, not attempting to reclaim territory, but executing what appeared to be a scorched earth policy, destroying everything the Scourge had converted to prevent it from being used as raw material for regeneration. Aboard the transport, Alara pressed herself against a viewport, watching as the Ragnarok unleashed its full arsenal against the heart of the Scourge infestation. Energy weapons unlike anything in the modern arsenal carved through the crystalline masses, while gravity manipulators tore apart the largest formations at a molecular level. "They're not just defeating it," she whispered. "They're annihilating it." Once all transports were safely recovered, the Ragnarok's main engines flared with terrible power. The great warship began to withdraw from the immediate battle zone, maintaining its devastating barrage as it created distance. Then, from recessed launchers along its spine, it deployed a series of devices that moved toward the remnants of Viridian Deep and the surrounding Scourge concentrations. These devices activated simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that seemed to fold space itself, collapsing the entire area into a singularity that lasted mere seconds before dissipating, leaving nothing behind but empty void where once a research station and its crystalline invaders had existed. The survivors were led from the transport bay into the cavernous interior of the Ragnarok. Despite the ship's intimidating exterior, Its internal spaces were surprisingly functional, designed with efficiency rather than comfort in mind, but not inhumane. Medical personnel, themselves heavily augmented but clearly focused on healing rather than combat, immediately began attending to the injured. Alara and Zalter were separated from the others and escorted to what appeared to be a command center. Here, tactical displays showed the continuing operation against scattered scourge elements throughout the nebula, being systematically hunted down and destroyed by Legion forces. And here, standing before the main strategic table, was the architect of their salvation, a figure whose very presence seemed to bend reality around him through sheer force of will. Warlord Salus turned as they entered, his augmented eyes assessing them with clinical precision. Up close, his imposing stature was even more apparent, as was the extent of his cybernetic modifications. What organic components remained showed signs of extreme age held at bay by technology, while the mechanical elements integrated so seamlessly that it was difficult to determine where flesh ended and machine began. Dr. Alara Vance, he stated, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass normal hearing. Chief Technician Zalter, your emergency beacon was received and understood. Alara stepped forward, finding her voice despite her awe and trepidation. Your Legion Ascendant. You've been gone for centuries. Gone, Salus repeated, as if considering the word. No, waiting. The Legion withdraws only to prepare for greater conflicts. The Silicate Scourge is such a conflict. You know these things? Zalter asked. The Scourge predates your Concord, predates even the Terran Civil War, Salus explained, gesturing to one of the tactical displays where crystalline formations were being systematically eliminated. There is silicon-based collective consciousness that perceives all other matter as either threat or resource. They do not negotiate, do not compromise, do not tire. They consume and convert, using each victory to fuel the next. My research, Alara said, connecting pieces of information. The energy patterns in the nebula, they were drawing the Scourge. Correct. The energy signature matches what we classified as Scourge bait, remnant vibrations from previous infestations. The creatures are drawn to these signatures, using them to locate new feeding grounds. A communication officer approached, reporting that a Concord battle group had been detected approaching the nebula's perimeter. Salus acknowledged the information with a nod before turning back to Alara. Your emergency beacon contained more than a distress call, he said. It carried an Omega threat classification, the highest warning in Legion protocols. That designation activated contingency measures established centuries ago. So you came to save us? Alara asked, still struggling to reconcile this legend of brutality with their rescue. Something approximating a smile briefly crossed Salus's face. We came to destroy the Scourge. Your survival was a tactical consideration. Your knowledge of their current manifestation is valuable. And now, Zalter pressed. The Concord will not welcome the return of the Legion Ascendant. Your methods, your very existence, violate countless treaties. Treaties signed after our departure, by powers who chose comfort over vigilance. Salus replied without emotion. The Silicate Scourge is merely the first of the ancient threats stirring at the edges of known space. Your Concord lacks the will and the means to face what comes. Before Alara could respond, alerts sounded throughout the command center. The tactical display shifted to show the approaching Concord fleet, an impressive assemblage of the Alliance's most advanced warships, moving in a combat formation as they detected the Ragnarok. They think we're the threat, Alara realized. A reasonable assumption, Salus acknowledged, but irrelevant to our mission. He turned to his communications officer. Transmit the Scourge data package to the Concord flagship. Include visual confirmation of survivors and tactical analysis of remaining Scourge elements in the sector. The officer complied, sending a data burst that contained everything the Ragnarok had learned about the current Scourge incursion, along with footage of the rescued survivors. Salus added a direct message of his own, brief, uncompromising, and clear. Galactic Concord Command. The Legion Ascendant has returned to active status in response to an Omega-level threat. The entity, designated Silicate Scourge, has been contained at this location but exists in multiple sectors outside your jurisdiction. This incident confirms that the galaxy has grown too weak to defend itself against primordial threats. Prepare your forces accordingly, or stand aside for those who will. Warlord Salus, commanding the Ragnarok, Legion Ascendant. With that communication sent, Salus ordered the activation of the fold space drives once more. The great warship began to shudder as reality itself was bent to its will. Wait, Alara stepped forward. You're just leaving? What about us, the survivors? What about the Concord? You will be returned to your people, Salus stated matter-of-factly. A shuttle has been prepared with all survivors and relevant data regarding the Scourge encounter. It will launch before we depart. And you, she pressed. Where will you go? For a moment, something almost human flickered in the warlord's eyes. To prepare. This encounter was merely a scout force of the Scourge. Their main concentrations lie beyond the rim of charted space. The Legion will do what it has always done, stand between humanity and annihilation, whether humanity appreciates it or not. As promised, the survivors were transferred to a well-equipped shuttle that launched from the Ragnarok, just as the massive warship activated its fold space generators. The Concord fleet, still maintaining a cautious distance, watched as the ancient dreadnought tore open reality once more and vanished into the artificial rupture, leaving behind only the shuttle and the ominous void where Viridian Deep had once existed. The survivors were recovered by the Concord flagship, where they were treated with a mixture of compassion and intense curiosity. Debriefings lasted for days as officials attempted to reconcile the impossible. The return of the legendary Legion Ascendant, the existence of a threat ancient enough to predate the Concord itself, and the troubling implications for galactic security. For Alara Vance, the experience left her forever changed. The data she had collected on both the Scourge and the Legion's methods of combating them became the foundation for a new branch of Xenothrete research, eventually leading to the formation of the Concord's first true military intelligence division focused on extragalactic threats. For the galaxy at large, the incident at Viridian Deep marked the beginning of a new era of uncertainty. Reports of Legion activity at the edges of known space became increasingly common, always involving the eradication of threats most citizens had never heard of, always departing before diplomatic contact could be established. And somewhere beyond the rim, aboard the Ragnarok, Warlord Salus stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, methodically marking locations where Scourge energy signatures had been detected. The ancient enemy had returned, and with it, the Legion's purpose had been renewed. The desperate SOS from Viridian Deep had done more than save a single outpost. It had awakened humanity's last and greatest war god, and his crusade was only beginning. On the command deck of the Ragnarok, Salus reviewed the tactical data from their encounter with the Scourge. His augmented mind processed information at speeds no unmodified human could match, identifying patterns and projecting possible expansion vectors for the Silicon-based threat. Around him, the elite cadre of Legion officers worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise, their dedication absolute. Analysis confirms 17 potential Scourge incursion sites within the galactic rim, reported Strategic Commander Thorne, her body as heavily modified as Salus's own. Once his most trusted lieutenant during the Terran Civil War, she had followed him into exile without hesitation. Highest probability concentrations are in the Perseus Arm and the trailing edge of the Sagittarius sector. Salus nodded, his glowing eyes fixed on the holographic galaxy rotating before him. The pattern suggests deliberate targeting of high-energy stellar phenomena. The Scourge is drawn to unusual energy signatures, using them as guidance systems for their advanced scouts, which explains their presence at Viridian Deep, Thorne concluded. The nebula's core energy patterns served as a beacon. Precisely. Salus manipulated the hologram, focusing on a region of space far beyond the boundaries of Concord territory. Our next target lies here, at the edge of what they now call the Maelstrom Expanse. Long-range sensors detect Scourge energy signatures consistent with a major staging area. We will eliminate it before they can establish a foothold. Thorn hesitated, then spoke with the directness that had always characterized their relationship. The Praetorians performed admirably, but we sustained losses. 5 warriors fell in the close-quarters engagement. Our numbers are finite, warlord, as they have always been. Salus's voice held no sentimentality, only cold calculation. The Legion was never meant to win through numerical superiority, only through superior force application. We adapt, we improve, we endure. He turned from the tactical display, moving toward the ship's central armory, where Legion technicians were already modifying weapons based on data from the Viridian Deep engagement. The Ragnarok was more than a warship. It was a mobile fortress, factory, and research facility combined, designed for extended operations with minimal external support. The Concorde will respond to our reemergence, Thorn noted as she fell in a step beside him. Their diplomatic corps has already attempted to establish communication channels. There are 17 messages waiting in the buffer. And military assets? They've established a task force. 20 capital ships under Admiral Vargos, ostensibly for observation and contact purposes. Something approximating amusement flickered across Salus's face. Vargos, house name Toril. His great-grandfather served under my command during the Proxima campaign. A capable tactician, if somewhat conventional in his approach. They're tracking our fold space signature. Let them. Salus entered the armory, where dozens of Praetorians were having their battle armor upgraded with new defensive matrices specifically designed to counteract the Scourge's crystalline penetrators. The Concorde must witness what they face, what we have always faced. Perhaps then they will understand the necessity of our methods. Among the Legion's ranks, rumors of Salus's true nature had persisted for centuries. Some believed he was the product of experimental genetic engineering from before the Terran Civil War. Others whispered that his consciousness had been digitally preserved and transferred into successive clone bodies. The truth, known only to his innermost circle, was perhaps more disturbing. Salus was simply a man who had sacrificed his humanity piece by piece, replacing failing organs and limbs with increasingly advanced technology. His natural lifespan extended through means both scientific and terrible. What remained was a being of singular purpose, neither fully human nor machine, but a hybrid driven by an unwavering commitment to humanity's survival, no matter the cost. 3 days after departing Viridian Deep, the Ragnarok emerged from fold space on the outer edge of the Maelstrom expanse. Here, far from the established lanes of commerce and exploration, the fabric of space itself was distorted by competing gravitational forces from dying stars and nascent black holes. The perfect hunting ground for the Silicate Scourge. Multiple contacts, announced the sensor officer. Crystalline formations consistent with Scourge architecture spread across a debris field approximately 3 million kilometers in diameter. Salus studied the tactical display with narrowed eyes. The debris field had once been a small research outpost similar to Viridian Deep, though no distress call had reached the Concorde from this remote location. More disturbing were the fragments of vessels scattered throughout the field, ships of unknown configuration, suggesting this region of space hosted civilizations unknown to the Concorde. Life signs? Thorn asked. Negative. The outpost appears completely crystallized. Scourge biomass readings indicate advanced colonization, at least 3 standard months of growth and assimilation. Salus's cybernetic hand clenched. We're behind their advance curve. This is not an incursion point. It's an established beachhead. He turned to his weapons officer. Prepare the Void Lance. Maximum dispersion pattern. Target the central mass concentrations first, then sweep to periphery. The order sent a ripple of tension through the command deck. The Void Lance was the most devastating weapon in the Ragnarok's arsenal. A gravimetric distortion cannon that literally folded space around its targets, crushing them into singularities before allowing space to snap back into normal configuration. Its use had been outlawed by every civilized power in the galaxy for the simple reason that it left irreparable wounds in the fabric of reality. Targeting solutions calculated, reported the weapons officer. Void Lance at full charge. Firing sequence initiated. From the prow of the Ragnarok extended a massive array of focusing rings, each crackling with energy that seemed to drink in the light around it. Space itself dimmed around the vessel as power was channeled into the ancient weapon. When it discharged, there was no beam, no visible projectile, only a rippling distortion that spread outward like a wave through the Scourge formations. Where this wave passed, the crystalline structures imploded, drawn into microscopic points of infinite density before disappearing entirely. The effect spread throughout the debris field, consuming Scourge biomass with terrifying efficiency. Direct hit on all primary targets, the weapons officer confirmed. Scourge mass reduced by 73% and declining. Secondary formations attempting to regroup. Deploy Praetorian strike teams to eliminate survivors, Salus ordered. Full spectrum scan of the region. I want to know where they came from and where they were going next. As the Ragnarok methodically cleansed the region of the remaining Scourge presence, analysis of the debris revealed a disturbing truth. This had not been a random attack, but a calculated strike against a facility that had been studying the same energy phenomena as Viridian Deep. The pattern suggested the Scourge was systematically targeting research into certain fundamental forces, almost as if it feared what such research might discover. They're evolving, Salus observed, reviewing the data in his private war chamber, developing strategic thinking beyond simple consumption. This changes the threat assessment significantly. Thorn, who had joined him after overseeing the cleanup operation, nodded grimly. The old records indicated they operated primarily on instinct. If they're now capable of targeted strikes against specific technological threats, then they are preparing for something larger. Salus accessed ancient files from the Legion's secured archives, records dating back to humanity's first encounters with the Scourge centuries ago. There are patterns here, cycles of aggression and withdrawal. The Scourge doesn't simply consume. It tests defenses, probes for weaknesses, then retreats to process what it has learned. Leading to what? A convergence event. Salus's voice grew darker. A mass incursion from multiple vectors simultaneously, overwhelming all resistance through sheer volume of attack. The last such event occurred before the founding of the Concord, when humanity was still confined to a handful of star systems. It nearly ended our species. The implication hung heavy in the air. If the current attacks were merely probing actions, the true threat was yet to come, and would be exponentially more devastating. As the Ragnarok continued its hunt for Scourge outposts along the galactic rim, the Concord's response to the Legion's return evolved from confusion to alarm. Emergency sessions of the Concord Council debated how to address the reappearance of a military force many had considered a dark legend from humanity's past. Some advocated for immediate containment, arguing that the Legion's methods were too extreme, their autonomy too dangerous. Others, particularly those whose worlds lay closest to the regions where Scourge activity had been detected, argued for cooperation, or at least coordination. Admiral Vargos' task force maintained a discreet distance from the Ragnarok, observing but not interfering as the ancient warship methodically destroyed Scourge infestations across 3 sectors. The reports he transmitted back to Concord Command painted a sobering picture. The Legion, while brutal in its methods, was fighting an enemy that conventional Concord tactics could not have contained. 6 weeks after the incident at Viridian Deep, the Concord Council reached a decision. A diplomatic mission would be sent to establish formal contact with the Legion Ascendant, led by Ambassador Kira Solarin, a respected negotiator known for her work with historically isolated cultures. Her mission, to forge a working relationship with Warlord Salus that would bring the Legion's operations under some form of oversight while leveraging their unique capabilities against the Scourge threat. The diplomatic vessel Concordia rendezvoused with the Ragnarok near the outer reaches of the Helios cluster, where the Legion warship had just completed an operation against a significant Scourge presence. Ambassador Solarin, accompanied by a small team of advisors and scientists, including Dr. Alara Vance, whose first-hand experience with both the Scourge and the Legion made her invaluable, boarded the ancient battleship with a mixture of trepidation and determination. Their reception was coldly formal. Praetorian guards escorted them through corridors where Legion personnel moved with disciplined efficiency, their augmented bodies and focused demeanor a stark contrast to the diverse and individualistic culture of the Concorde. The ship itself was a testament to a philosophy of warfare long abandoned by modern military doctrine. Function absolutely prioritized over form, with redundant systems and armor measuring in meters rather than centimeters. In the central conference chamber, Warlord Salus awaited them, flanked by his senior commanders. He stood motionless as the delegation entered, his augmented eyes assessing each member with analytical precision. Ambassador Solarin, he acknowledged without preamble. You represent the Galactic Concorde in official capacity. I do, Warlord. Solarin stepped forward, her composed dignity a counterpoint to Salus's martial presence. I bring greetings from the Concorde Council and a proposal for cooperation against our common enemy. The Silicate Scourge is not our common enemy, Salus corrected her. It is humanity's executioner, waiting patiently at the edge of known space. The Legion has always understood this. Your Concorde has chosen to forget. Alara moved forward, drawing Salus's attention. We haven't forgotten, Warlord. We simply didn't know. The records of the early encounters were classified, then lost during the reorganization after the Civil War. What we're facing now, it's new to us. Not new, returning. Salus gestured, and a holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing a map of known space with dozens of points highlighted in red. These are confirmed Scourge activity sites identified in the past 6 weeks. The pattern indicates preparation for a convergence event, a mass invasion from multiple vectors simultaneously. Based on historical data, we estimate the main assault will begin within 4 standard months. The Concorde delegation stared at the display in shock. The scale of the threat was far beyond what they had anticipated. The Concorde fleet isn't prepared for a threat of this magnitude, Admiral Vargos admitted, speaking for the first time since their arrival. Even with full mobilization, we could not defend all these sectors simultaneously. No conventional force could, Salus agreed, which is why conventional tactics will fail. The Scourge cannot be negotiated with, contained, or deterred. It can only be eradicated, system by system, until none remain. Ambassador Solarin studied the Warlord carefully. What do you propose, then? The Legion is a formidable force, but even the Ragnarok cannot be everywhere at once. We will not need to be. Salus manipulated the holographic display, focusing on a region of space deep within what had once been Legion territory. During the final days of the Civil War, before our withdrawal to Hades Prime, the Legion developed a network of gravimetric resonance stations, what you would now call fold space inhibitors. When activated, they create a barrier that prevents the Scourge's unique form of matter from maintaining cohesion across interstellar distances. Cutting off their ability to reinforce and coordinate, Alara realized, her scientific mind immediately grasping the implications. You could isolate each infestation and destroy them one by one. Precisely. Salus nodded with what might have been approval. However, the network remains inactive, and several key nodes have likely deteriorated beyond function in the intervening centuries. They must be restored and calibrated precisely to the current Scourge energy signatures. Ambassador Solarin saw the opening. That's where the Concorde can assist. We have resources, personnel, and reach that would expedite such a project significantly. For the first time, Salus seemed to truly consider the delegation before him. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted subtly. A conditional alliance, he stated finally. The Legion will provide the technical specifications and coordinate the strategic deployment. The Concorde will supply the necessary resources and facilitate access to the territories where the nodes must be reactivated. Operational command remains with Legion forces. Any attempt to subvert the original parameters of the network for political purposes will be considered an act of hostility. The terms were stark, the underlying message clear. This was not a partnership of equals, but a grudging acknowledgement of mutual necessity. Yet given the scale of the threat they faced, Ambassador Solarin recognized it was the best outcome possible. "I believe we can work with these terms," she responded carefully. "Though the Council will require assurances that Legion operations within Concord space will respect certain basic protocols regarding civilian populations and protected systems." "The Legion does not target non-combatants," Salas stated flatly. "Never has. Our reputation for brutality stems from our unwillingness to accept half measures in the face of existential threats. Remember that distinction, Ambassador." The negotiations continued for hours, establishing the framework for what would become known as the Omega Accords, an uneasy alliance between the modern galactic community and a resurgent force from its darkest past. Throughout the discussions, Ilera observed Salas with growing fascination. Despite his fearsome appearance and uncompromising manner, there was something almost transcendent in his single-minded dedication to humanity's survival. He was neither hero nor villain in any conventional sense, but something else entirely, a living weapon forged for one purpose, finally unleashed again after centuries of waiting. As the delegation prepared to depart, Salas approached Ilera privately. "Dr. Vance," he said, his harmonic voice modulated to a lower volume, "your analysis of the Scourge energy patterns at Viridian Deep was remarkably insightful. Few modern scientists have grasped their fundamental nature so quickly." "I had access to some old family records," she admitted. "My great-grandfather served in the early containment campaigns, though most of his journals were heavily redacted." "Aldrin Vance," Salas stated, surprising her with his immediate recall. "Xenobiophysics Division, attached to the 7th Legion Strike Force during the Proxima containment. He developed the first effective energy disruption fields against early Scourge formations." Ilera stared at him in shock. "You knew him?" "I knew all who served under my command," Salas replied simply. "Your work honors his legacy. The Legion has need of minds like yours, Dr. Vance. When this diplomacy concludes, consider where your talents might best serve humanity's survival." The offer, for that was what it clearly was, left Ilera speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Salas had turned away, returning to the tactical displays where his commanders awaited further orders. As the Concord delegation departed the Ragnarok, the massive warship was already preparing for its next operation, a strike against a major Scourge concentration in the Thanatos sector. The alliance had been formed, but the true test still lay ahead. Whether the disciplined brutality of the Legion Ascendant, combined with the resources and reach of the Galactic Concord, would be enough to stem the tide of the coming convergence. Aboard the diplomatic vessel, Ilera stood at a viewport, watching as the Ragnarok engaged its fold space drives and vanished in a ripple of distorted reality. The desperate SOS from Viridian Deep had done far more than save a single research station. It had changed the course of galactic history, awakening a force that many had hoped would remain forever dormant, yet might prove to be their only salvation against the crystalline death that waited at the edge of known space. The ancient war between humanity and the Silicate Scourge had entered a new phase, and at its center stood Warlord Salas, humanity's last war god, neither fully man nor machine, but something forged in the crucible of necessity. A weapon awakened once more to fulfill its purpose, regardless of the cost. And as the Ragnarok disappeared into the depths of space, Ilera couldn't help but wonder. When the Scourge was finally defeated, if it could be defeated, what place would remain for such a being in the peace that followed? For a weapon, once used, is rarely returned willingly to its scabbard. And a god of war, once awakened, rarely returns to slumber without exacting a price from those who summoned its wrath.